I've been thinking a lot about metaphor, mythology, analogy, any other sort of thing that word you could use to try and describe representing something by representing something else. And this is something that, of course, comes up in a lot of artists' careers. It definitely comes up in my own. And I wonder why, because there's a colleague of mine, peer, I guess, that constantly asks me, "Oh, if your work is all about you and your life and your experiences, why aren't you just photographing yourself and your life? Why are you using metaphors?" And I struggle with that question. Why do I use metaphors? I mean, there is the obvious nature of it, which is safety, because I don't want to be that vulnerable. I don't want to share literally about my life, especially not in this day and age, because sharing. I feel like if I share too much, it's boy. I mean, with the amount of like stalking and the identity thefts and things like this, and it's just I'm not interested in oversharing in that way. But there's also the nature of wanting to have a private life, and that's sort of a thing that maybe it's people in my generation. The younger generation seems to be perfectly happy with sharing everything about their lives to a great extent. But there's also the point of, I've seen work where people are incredibly specific. They're very much like, this is my life journey, and I've often, not always, but often found I couldn't connect with it because they sort of got so finite and so specific about their exact experiences that I could not engage with it. And there's a fine line. There's a balancing act of like, I want to be metaphorical enough that I'm not feeling that I have become overly vulnerable by sharing too much about something, but that I'm still sort of in some ways relatable. So I don't want to go too abstracted. Now, mind you, if I sat back and looked at my work sort of objectively at the moment, I think it's definitely too abstract and it's not specific enough. There have been series that I have done in my life that are definitely overly specific, and oddly most people really connect with those. And so it's one of those struggles that I have of when I make work that is incredibly specific, vulnerable, personal, intimate, I mean, whatever word you want to put to it, people love it. But I feel, I'm not sure what the right word is. I mean, it's vulnerable is the easiest term, but like the fear, the anxiety that goes on when I make work that is so incredibly personal is so, I don't even know how to explain it. It's so much of a concern that like basically I will make that work and then I kind of will sort of just set it to the side, and I won't promote it, I won't talk about it, I won't show it very often. So I made it, I feel the sense of sort of accomplishment for creating the work, but then I sort of set it to the side away, and I will promote the less personal, less intimate. And that's a difficulty. I think that's hindered me in many ways. I think if I were willing to be more intimate and personal and all of those characteristics, then I probably would be doing better with progressing in my work. And that's a difficult balance, because while I want people to engage in my work, I also want to make it accessible and sort of aesthetically pleasing, that's a whole different balancing act, that trying to find the nature of aesthetically pleasing. But it's difficult. I've tried to be as vulnerable as possible. I've done works that involve my journal writing, very just off the cuff writing, and I like those. They make me feel like I'm being vulnerable without actually being vulnerable, because I would do my journal writing and then I would basically abstract that journal writing in some way. I have done literal journal writing and then just sort of edited it down to like a few sentences that I thought were most poignant. I've also done work about, in hindsight, basically. So looking at letters and looking at journal entries with 20 years of hindsight. And that's been really, that was incredibly rewarding. They all were very rewarding, and they all had their great place in sort of the oeuvre that is my work. Yes, I like saying that because it sounds incredibly pompous and arrogant. It's just fun. But the nature of the desire to do metaphors, I mean, part of it is of course, my upbringing. I was raised in the church, not literally. I mean, well, actually literally in the church, not figuratively in the church. My father was a priest, so after school, when my dad would pick me up from school, he would take me to his office, which was a church. And so I literally just was raised in a church as my playground, more or less. But almost all the artwork around me, all the imagery that comes with religion. And of course, my dad was a priest, so we traveled a lot. When we traveled, we would go to churches. So a lot of the things I saw were metaphors. The entire story of religion, as far as the visual representation, we don't have any quantifiable sort of ideas or history of how things looked, so we metaphor them. We give certain colors to certain attributes. We give certain physical characteristics to certain things, and that I was raised on that. Now partly that there's that. I was also raised on late 70s, early 80s American TV and movies, which had its own metaphorical aesthetics as well. Even I could say magazines and billboards and advertising, and they had their own metaphorical things as well. I mean, when I was in college, I studied for 2 years to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist. It wasn't decided at that point, but I was still studying it. And so the whole nature of advertising, marketing, and sort of the way that they manipulate, and even in TV and movies, with color palettes or wardrobing, or the locations and the time of day, and all these things that are basically intended to in some way manipulate the viewer to engage in the story of whatever in a certain way. I mean, this is all metaphors. They're all metaphors, similes. They're all whatever you want to phrase it as, but they're all, without saying the thing, they're saying the thing. And a lot of that, translates to my current work, where I'm doing lots of layers, and I'm doing lots of folds, and I'm doing lots of, I want to say lots of dark depth, but it's not about darkness. It's about trying to take a photograph that I put a lot of time, effort, and money into creating. So I found locations, did wardrobing, chose models, did the photo shoot, edited the photo shoot, printed the images. And then how much of that is actually necessary? So how much of that can I reduce? How much can I remove and still get the same or a new effect from the imagery? And the layering and the lines, they're all about the amount of things. I taught in the United Arab Emirates for many years, not many years, 6 years, 5.5, 6 years. And that time affected me. I don't have the fondest of memories. Now, there were some, individual times that were really great there and were a lot of fun, strong memories, but I don't look back on that time and go oh boy, those were the best of times, because of the other underlying things. And this is the layering effect. It's basically baggage, so we're all carrying baggage. We carry baggage from our previous relationships. We carry baggage from our previous jobs. We carry baggage from our parents. I do. I carry all of these things. And right now, in my mind, I have a lot of these things sort of coming together because my brother died a couple of years ago. He was my only brother. We did not have a great relationship. I always wanted a better relationship with him, but he was bipolar, and that caused a lot of sort of difficulty in our relationship. Beside the fact that he was very bitter. He thought that my parents loved me more than they loved him, but that's his problem, not my problem. But this idea of like the layers of baggage, because my parents are getting old, and they are starting to show their age. They're now in a assisted living facility, and they're starting to show sort of the signs of aging, the getting old, the crankiness, the irritability, the so just like so many different childish characteristics that, in their prime that they did not possess, that they have now reverted or begun to revert to. And simultaneously, I'm about to have my first child. Well, I guess my wife is having the child, but I'm going to be having a child. And so I'm thinking a lot about the things that brought my parents to the point that they are. All the baggage, all the years. I mean, because like when I went and visited them at the assisted living facility, and boy, people of that era, so like there are people that are 90 and older, and they are like throwing around racist terms and sexist terms as though it's completely normal to them. And it's just like, wow, that's a tough one to swallow. And then trying to think about how I'm going to be the best parent to my child is so I'm both simultaneously watching my parents digress into old age while I'm also balancing how can I start a new life on its best foot. And so this dichotomy of both watching the progression, the end of a life, basically. I hate to say it like that, but like that's my parents' lives are coming to an end. It might still be a decade or more off for sure, but it's on the progressive line, and simultaneously trying to think how to be the best role model example to my child. So this baggage basically, and this nature of like metaphors and so on, it all sort of holds together because there's a certain amount of vulnerability that as I'm going to have to take over financial responsibility for my parents at some point. So I'm going to have to take control over their lives. And the same time that I'm being responsible for having a new baby in the world. And so these multiple responsibilities are creating additional layers of baggage. But the point is that like specifically, so let's go back to the imagery you're looking at, which with the folds and the layers of paint and all this kind of stuff. It's the intersection of all these baggages, the point where all the lines come together, and the overlap and the relationship that like it's I keep thinking this week about the term if then. So if you're following one of the lines, let's say in the piece, and you run into it, an intersecting point, it's if this choice, then turn right. If that choice, turn left. If this choice, go straight. So everything in life is a series of relationships and layering effects, and the multiplicity of baggage, the fact that when, in many ways I look back on like my early dating life as like so beautiful and so romantic and so naive because I didn't know any better. like it didn't have any experience, it didn't have any baggage, and I'm so looking forward to that with my child, is like this, the firsts of all these things. Like it's going to be so much fun. But now, having had so many different relationships and many different jobs and many different bosses and many different life experiences, and living on 3 different continents and all these different experiences, the amount of baggage that is weighing me down, but not like in a bad way. I mean, it's not like, oh, I'm so burdened. Like, I'm still first world problems here. Like, this is not me really complaining. This is me just trying to talk through and sort of come to some understanding of these first world luxury problems. The fact is, the underlying fear of all of this is fear. That's it. So why do I work in metaphors, and why do most artists work in metaphors or some sense of metaphorical imagery? Is because I feel uncomfortable showing all of that. Like, so if I were to try to explain all of my rationales and my reasons for the baggage and the things that I carry around with me, to a certain extent, people might think like, why are you worrying about that? Like, that's not important. And in many ways, a lot of it's not important, but it's important in the thing that made me who I am. So, while some job that I still like harp on how horrible the boss was in my mind, it's not really important. I could move on from it. And then part of the metaphorical stuff is trying to find ways to move on. So like when I did my 20 days series, like the point of doing that series was to put closure and an end and a period at the end of that time and relationship in my life. And it worked because, within about 2 years of completing that work, I ended up meeting my wife, and there you go. So trying to create some amount of closure on some things is important to me. And chances are this work that you're seeing me work on right now will probably later on be very much about loss, because I've been making all of this work post my brother dying, and simultaneously at the same time the progression of my parents' old age. So it's been that. Now things might change in the near future, because again, having a kid probably in the next couple of weeks. So I'm hoping that there'll be some objectivity or a sort of heightened objective to it. I'm not sure. I don't know what's going to go on, but point being is that my work in hindsight always has a very reflective quality. But like a lot of artists, I don't know what I'm making when I'm making it. I know what I made afterwards, when I can look back on it and say like, oh, that work was about blank. Like, that's really easy. But trying to understand what I'm making when I'm making it is very difficult. But going back to the metaphors, is that the whole idea is, again, like religious imagery, marketing, advertising, they're all using metaphors. Everybody uses metaphors. I mean, even the person who's giving me criticism about using metaphors in their work uses metaphors. Like, we all do, because it's really difficult to use ourselves. That is a level of vulnerability, intimacy, and sharing that I don't feel like a lot of us are incredibly comfortable doing. I mean, look at even social media, like these people that you think are sharing so much about their lives, they're editing that as well. So like everything is curated and edited. Nothing is truly, spontaneous and vulnerable, unfortunately, in this day and age. So I encourage you to use metaphors, but just sort of be aware of what the metaphors mean to you and how they translate out to the world. Because, like I when I teach color theory. Like there's always the thing of like, in the Western world, the color red is often seen as either love or blood, whereas in certain cultures in the Asian region, the same red represents death. So colors, as metaphors, have very strong representations in different representations in different worlds. And also, like, if I'm going to do imagery that's based in, let's say, Christian religious iconography, even though, just by, like, let's say the color. So I'm going to put the woman in blue because that's what Mary always wore, kind of thing. That's not going to land very well in the Middle East. So there's a certain sense of like how much metaphor works and how much is too abstract. As I said, I believe at this moment I'm being very guarded in many ways, and so I'm therefore working more abstractly than I probably want to. I wish I could be more vulnerable about it, but there's a certain amount of, I want to say, happiness / joy, like contentment. I'm not sure what the right word is, but like when I'm most comfortable doing vulnerable work would probably be when I'm most comfortable in my life. So if that makes any sense, and I'm sure that makes sense to you all, some of you at least. But like when you're feeling off and uncomfortable, the last thing that I want to do is add to my uncomfortableness by being extremely vulnerable, and about my fears and concerns and all that in my art, because I'm already feeling uncomfortable in my daily life. So there's a balance of I want to feel happy, comfortable, I don't know, accepted, whatever term works for you to understand. Like, so like your life is going well, my life is going well. So then I'm more willing to involve fear and vulnerability in my art. So, but if I am feeling vulnerable and fearful every day, I don't want to also be feeling vulnerable and fearful in my studio practice. So it's a very interesting dynamic where like I should be putting more of that into my art when I am feeling that way. But it's just too much, because I often find that the act of making work is, the terms I love to use are, it's best when it's either completely complementary or completely contradictory. That's it. So I'm more, in the case of this, I'm probably being more contradictory. So like, in order to be vulnerable in my art, I need to be secure in the rest of my life. Whereas if I'm feeling very vulnerable in the rest of my life, I find that adding to that vulnerability by also being vulnerable in my art is just sort of exponentially more difficult. And so therefore I use a lot of metaphors, and I don't, there's throughout art history, there's always people, I mean, we all use metaphors, everybody does. So like, it's not like I'm special in this situation, but it's that it's important to know why we do it. I'm saying I do it out of fear. I do it because I don't want to be that vulnerable. And to be clear, I have in my life been that vulnerable, and it's been while it is often very rewarding, because I end up connecting with other people on a very intimate level. It's also very frightening, and it's very awkward, especially if I make work that's incredibly vulnerable and then nobody connects with it. That's of course the biggest fear. So being very literal and then that not working is probably the most fearful thing, because I mean, what if I literally tell the story of my life? This is the reality of my life, and people are like, meh, don't care, or that's dumb, or that's uninteresting. Like, I mean, how much worse am I gonna feel about that work if people literally find my life uninteresting versus the metaphor of my life and not finding that interesting? It's like, well, okay, that's fine. It was just a metaphor. So you don't find that interesting, not me. It's the metaphor. And that's that layer of protection that working with metaphors kind of allows me, and I'm sure many of you. So it's both good and bad, and it's helpful and it's not. And I'm talking about it now because in many ways I don't want to continue to use the metaphors, but in many ways I think the metaphors are a very strong characteristic that of the time that I was raised in the art world, and it's sort of what I do. So the idea of change, like completely shifting and changing to something else, I think is unrealistic. But I at least want to put out an acknowledgement that I'm aware of it. So I'm not ignorant of the fact that I am doing this because of my upbringing, because of my time period, because of my parents, because of my general fear of acceptance, or fear of lack of acceptance, or I don't know if it would be fear of acceptance or lack of acceptance, but my desire to be accepted and my fear of being rejected. That's what it is. Fear of rejection. So I'm perfectly fine with my artwork metaphorically being rejected, whereas if the work is about my life in the reality and it's rejected, that would be soul crushing. So that's a difficult thing, because as I said, I've done very personal works and people relate well to it. So like, I am relatable, but that does not change my fear. And all of these characteristics of like fear, relatability, not wanting to be rejected, I mean, these are literal mainstays of the creative life. We are constantly battling this day in and day out. I mean, every day I'm like, I go in the studio and I'm like, oh, this is beautiful. And then the next day I'm like, oh, what did I do to it? It's horrible. What do I do with this? I have no idea what to do with that. That's horrible. Just constantly going back and forth with this. And it's hard. And part of this doing this, I don't know, vlogging, journaling, whatever I'm doing here on YouTube, is my process, is trying to talk out these things, because I find that if I sit in my head and just think about things, I will literally just like think in circles and nothing will get resolved, nothing will get worked out. Whereas if I do the talking it out, oftentimes, even, sometimes your comments are very helpful to me, because you point out my hypocrisies and my contradictory nature. And that's fine. That's good. That's helpful. I mean, I like constructive criticism. We all do, but keep it constructive. And there's this whole balancing act of just when to use metaphors, how much metaphors to use, and how, I guess, even how abstracted to make these metaphors, because I want to be vulnerable. I want to overcome my fear of rejection, but it's very hard. And just to be clear, like, it's not hard today to do it, because I'm willing to say this in this recording, but it's hard to maintain that fear of rejection. I can be confident a day, maybe a week, and then sooner or later something will happen that will undo that and make me feel rejected or not accepted, or whatever term you want to put to it. So it's not the ability to do it, but it's the ability to maintain it. And that's really very difficult to do. And so, as I said, I will use these metaphors as a shield, as a barrier, as a way for me to like be able to say, a way for me to be able to feel like I've said the thing I want to say, but without the vulnerability that you as the viewer are going to literally look at the word and go, oh, I can see deep into his soul. So I'm giving you the keys, I'm giving you the clues, but I'm not giving you complete access. And that's that guarded nature that I think all of us have to some extent, but in my work, that's what I do. I intentionally use metaphors and abstraction to create a guarded map, a guarded set of keys, a guarded set of sort of, because like the metaphors, you can see them in my work being used over and over and over multiple times, trying to find better, more interesting, more dynamic ways to express the same ideas in a more effective manner. Because in the end, I want viewers of my art to be able to take their own life experiences, their own baggage, their own stories, and project it onto my work. And they go, I can see my life journey metaphorically in your metaphorical life journey. And trying to find that connected nature of how my life journey translates into a metaphor is copacetic with how somebody else's life journey would be represented visually in metaphors. And it's when that combination comes together that the magic truly happens. I mean, and it's funny because like I think through like, we'll call it like the great art historian or art historical works, and like there's some incredibly abstracted metaphorical stuff throughout the history of art, and most of it has no explanation given to it. Like, so like art historians are sitting down and like just trying to figure out what was the artist thinking when they made this, and there's no documentation, no explanation, no whatever, and they're just literally projecting their own baggage, their own life stories, their own metaphors onto these historical works. And it's just like, wouldn't it be nice if the access to the artist's brain was available? Because we do have interesting brains. We do think about the world, see and see our history and see our life experiences in very unique ways, whether it's extremely emotionally or lack of emotion, or like me, I will tuck away all of my problems and concerns and fears and all of that until it bursts. I'm sort of a tea kettle, so like I'm constantly like under pressure, and at some point the pressure valve will have to release. This is the way that I deal. Now, is it the healthiest? Absolutely not, but it's my way. So there you go. And in the same way, like everybody does it differently. And how did I get to doing it this way? Probably because I had some role model as a kid that did it that way, and I thought it worked, and there you go. Bada bing. That's what I do. So working in metaphors, we all do it. Is it helpful? Maybe, probably not. Would getting past the metaphors be more beneficial? I'm not sure, because I keep thinking if I got rid of the metaphors, that means I'm going to be taking pictures literally of my daily life. My daily life is kind of boring. I mean, on a daily basis, kind of boring. I don't have any big traumatic, life-changing, crazy, absurd things. And they're the things that make for interesting stories, which is what's important to me. Like, you're telling a story. I could look at my work and say, like, okay, why do I always do figurative and women in sexy outfits or poses? Why do I do that? Because I was raised in a very non-sexy, non-pretty. I mean, don't get me wrong, my mother was an interior decorator. The house was beautiful, but like there was not any intimacy. There was not any sort of beauty. And my mother dressed well and all that, but I desired that. The best word that I can always put, or best phrase that I have for my work is always, I desire to be desired. So you can translate that any way you want because it's all probably true. Artistically, I desire to be desired. Personally in my private life, of course I desire to be desired. Everybody wants to be desired. That idea of desiring to be desired is manifests in my work because then I use imagery of people who are desirable, but yet they also desire to be desired. So like everybody has that layer of some amount of that, and this is along with metaphors and mythology and analogy and all this, the nature of layered sort of effects to our work is of the utmost importance, because being shallow, being two-dimensional, being just it makes you so you're making decorative work. This entire conversation, well, it's not a conversation, this entire monologue is about trying to investigate, trying to encourage you to investigate in the same way that I'm trying to do the underlying nature of why we make our artwork. And that is always my intention with everything I do, is trying to have a better grasp, a better understanding, and a better appreciation of what's going on in my life, what are my life circumstances, and what am I trying to express and why. And so like, why have I made it, and why should you as a viewer care about it or engage with it, sympathize, empathize, whatever phrase you want to use for it. Why have I made it, and why should you care?